Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the second event in our fall seminar series created by the PDMI's Workshop Council, The State of Audio Media. We welcome all of you to today's event, PDMI members and non-members alike. Speaking of membership, if you're not a PDMI member but are attending today, we'd love to have you consider joining. During the past 18 months, when we've lost 3 multi-day in-person conventions before we actually held one in October, there's been no better way to support the mission of the PDMI than joining and sharing your voice in the direction of the industry. In the handouts tab of your control panel, you'll find our PDMI membership brochure. I urge you to download it, flip through it, and contact any of our team members should you desire more information. Before we get to today's conversation, one other housekeeping note. The group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the webinar. Today, the Workshop Council welcomes this quartet of leaders in the audio media space to its virtual stage. During the pandemic, audio continued its growth as a strong outlet for performance and direct-to-consumer marketers. From the explosion of successful podcasts to streaming and satellite music services, as well as good old terrestrial radio, marketers have created powerful connections with new customers and expanded their brand relationships with existing ones. What's hot in audio media now? What's working today? And what's working even better? I'm thrilled to welcome this group of speakers, each from a PDMI member company. We have Philippe Generali, President and CEO of Media Monitors, Buck Robinson, Executive Vice President of the Media Manager, Angie Seacliff, Director of Digital Audio for Hybrid Media Services, and Jeff Small, Founder and CEO of Strategic Media, Inc. Welcome all of you.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Thanks. Absolutely. Let's get to it. First question I've got here is it takes off of TV advertising, and it's kind of its own shift into what people are now calling video advertising, no matter the outlet. Radio advertising now has shifted into something called audio marketing or audio media, with online and digital, satellite, and most powerfully in recent years, podcast expanding the opportunities. As it stands today, what are the 2 most important things performance marketers and agencies should know about the evolving audio marketing universe? And Jeff, I'm going to start with you.
All right, thanks, Tom. I'd say it's hard to dial in on just 2, but one of the things that we're seeing is the audiences are very fractured in terms of all the audio channels and the options that listeners have these days across all the channels that you've already mentioned. So there's really no cookie cutter approach for a marketer or a brand that comes into the audio space looking for a solution to how they're going to market their product. We work hard to do the due diligence to find which channel is going to work best for them, to identify messaging so that we can take the next steps and explore whether it's terrestrial or podcasts or satellite or streaming, and build on those successes so that they can dig into the fruits of all of audio has to offer.
Makes sense. Angie, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the 2 main things that I would say are really important to note is, technology is going to continue to fuel, those advancements and growth in the space. Tech has really aided the industry's growth by really improving accessibility and enabling publishers and to really make their audio supply more scalable. So we're really seeing a rapid emergence of new formats and platforms with social audio, video podcasts. We're definitely seeing smart speakers and voice assistants becoming more prevalent, which is opening up really new interesting opportunities regarding interactivity. For example, one of the latest things is refrigerators can now stream audio and video. So it's just really interesting to see how technology is really driving, audio as a whole. I think the second thing that's really important, and perhaps more important than ever, is really personalization. According to a study by Twilio Segment, about 60% of consumers are likely to become repeat buyers after a personalized experience. And I think it's really interesting to know that because, as Jeff mentioned, fragmentation, there's people listening across different platforms, across different content types and formats. It's really important to acknowledge that messaging really needs to be unique to its platform. I think personalization is just, tremendously important when, marketing to audiences.
I think That seems to be the way across a lot of different outlets, but audio makes a lot of sense these days for sure. Buck, what about yourself?
Well, I think that the biggest thing, Tom, is, when look back 10, even 15 years ago, a lot of times when people would be looking at TV being their primary channel, and then they'd determine whether or not they wanted to do radio or whether their product fit for radio. And I think the reality is today, with all of the different channels that are now available in the audio universe, it's not a matter of whether or not you should be doing audio. It's a matter of which type of audio should you be doing. And that's really how it has changed, because now instead of it just being the AM FM network type of option, or throw in Sirius into that mix, now you have such a variety of different options available to you. One of them is going to be right for you. And the key, the second part, if you will, for me, is to make sure that you are testing whichever of those channels it is in the way that is appropriate to really get an effective read of that particular channel. Don't treat them as if they're all the same and that there's kind of this cookie cutter approach to getting them to either prove themselves or not prove themselves. You really have to look at them and be able to understand the nuances of what makes an effective podcast test different than a network radio test, or a digital streaming test different than something else that you might have done in another offline channel like television. So it really takes an understanding of those nuances, but the fact of the matter is there are more choices to marketers than ever, and that gives more opportunity than ever.
That's great. That's Philippe. Last but not least, your turn.
Yes. Well, what we see is that I think everybody agrees that audio is hot. You've heard that on many occasions in the trade press, and we hear it all the time. There's a resurgence of audio in the past few years, and it's really not only, of course, the traditional radio, but of course audio on demand. Audio on demand gives you opportunities that didn't exist before. The interesting part about audio on demand is that the listener is more engaged than on regular classic audio, if I can say. So that gives opportunity for anybody who is pursuing a more active listener. Show me that you want to buy my product, to use some of that audio on demand. And we're lucky that audio on demand, unlike on video where Netflix is the 800-pound gorilla in that arena, and there's no advertising there. With podcasts, we can advertise and have the listener engaged on top of that, which is great news.
Yep. Great. This next one's for agency leaders, and this kind of comes from one of our prep calls that we had, where we got into talking about the nuances of the cost differences between the different outlets and so forth. You're all seeing clients who are coming at you thinking that they've got the hot new thing for the hot new audio outlet. A lot of them want to be on podcasts or in digital or something. How can you best highlight for them the nuances they need to understand and help them understand where their advertising will work best? Buck, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting challenge that we have, is a lot of people come in or are drawn into the audio space because the new shiny toy might be digital or it might be podcast. Or, how many times have we all had a client who's like, well, I love to listen to podcasts, so I want to be on podcasts. And you're like, okay, well, let's look at who's listening to podcasts. And so we have a lot of clients that come to us who have a target audience that, let's say, it skews 55 plus. Now, in terms of the podcast universe, that more senior is not where the bulk of the podcast listenership is. So it becomes a little bit of a square peg round hole. If you're really trying to target that audience, traditional radio might be a more cost-effective way to go, because there's a lot more options available to you and they're a lot more cost-effective. And that's sometimes not what a client wants to hear. They're, oh, but I want to be on podcasts. And the reality is you have to kind of talk them to, well, do you want to be successful or do you want to be on a podcast? And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes people will say, well, my product isn't right for audio because it skews younger. And they, in their mind, associate a younger audience with something that isn't radio related. And the reality is now there are great ways to target a wide variety of different demographics, whether it's, kind of a macro, 45 plus type audience, or a very micro type of audience. I want to particularly target vegans. You can do that in audio in a way that you could never have done that 10 years ago. And that's really exciting, because now it makes our channel more accessible to a wide variety of advertisers.
Makes sense. Jeff, I'm going to go to you next and then to you, Angie, because I know you have that podcast viewpoint that I want to kind of wrap up this question with. Jeff, you go ahead though.
All right, great. Buck, you made some excellent points. I agree. Being able to steer the clients in the direction that's going to be most advantageous for them is important based on their demographics. And I'll take it, I guess, to another layer, in the sense of if the audience or the product or service that we're representing is something that can be done well with a produced ad, where the messaging can be relayed with a higher frequency, a lot of times that will lead us towards guiding them towards terrestrial or satellite, where there's an opportunity to get that message out there from a frequency-based standpoint. Others need a little bit more storytelling, and in those cases, depending on the age, of course, and that the demographics are fit, podcasting or even host endorse is more suitable, where they can tell a story and really engage with the listener that is tuning into their show. And that can be done on a reach basis, where they're really reaching a broader audience, and you don't need that high frequency that you can get from terrestrial. So it's kind of a matter of what their goal is and what their messaging needs to be successful.
Makes sense. Angie?
Yeah, and echoing on, Buck's sentiments, I think it's really, essential before approaching any medium to really get a clear understanding of the brand's core values, product benefits, and incentives, to get a really good idea as to what channel is going to be, the best fit. Each channel has its purpose, and I think, some might not be a good fit for certain brands. For example, podcast might not be an ideal, situation for a hyper local client that is only present in a handful of markets potentially, But I think more cases than not, it's really, I feel like the multi-channel holistic approach is the most effective in, finding ways to create the least amount of overlap. I think, being that the podcasts are very popular, there is this belief that sometimes the most popular podcast is going to be, the most efficient placement or the biggest performer. And that's not always the case. I think it's really important to not only find the right audience for the brand, but really truly understand, what those main KPIs are for each individual brand. And, essentially, I think it's also really important to make sure you're not missing the mark if your budget is too small. For example, podcast CPMs tend to be at a premium, given that, there's less ad inventory available, and, using host endorsements can typically also, drive up that premium as well. So I think, some of those things are important to take in mind when planning.
Great. Philippe, I'm going to go to you as our research expert on this panel to start the next question. Most results show that radio ad spending rose more than 10% last year, 2020, most really attributable to digital outlets and opportunities. Did this expansion continue in 2021? And where are the best opportunities for direct consumer marketers and their agencies that they might want to investigate? Nope. Did we lose you? I think you're on mute, Philippe.
We can look at a few slides. Sorry about that. We can look at a few slides to see what are the networks that are carrying quite a bunch of TV direct response. For example, here we have a ranking over the past. This is a short sample over the past couple of weeks, so it's really fresh data rather than going for the year. We just wanted to have a view of something that's very recent, because we're all evolving. That happened in January and in March. In June is not reflective of what's happening today necessarily, but that's what we see for the past couple of weeks. You have networks that are carrying direct response advertising, and they're ranked there. And of course, you see sometimes instances that are high, and an estimated revenue, which we call ad rev, which is low. That's because it's the off hours that are most often used, where the cost is lower. But the networks are there. This is on TV. You want to go to the cable guys. So Lifetime, Fox News, CNN, A&E, Bally Sports, obviously targeted, but also low cost. There's probably a lot of overnights that we saw there. ESPN for the sports. We'll see later that the betting is a good category. That's doing well. That's emerging in audio, and obviously sports programming is a prime place to do that. I think we can go to the format. You wanted to know about the format also?
Yeah, let's talk about formats here.
So you have some of the formats that we see are the strong format: country music, news talk. These are the ones that are easy because news talk, the ads are very well accepted by the news talk public, the news talk audience. We found that it's much better swallowed, quote unquote, by a listener of news talk rather than a listener of music. So that's why we have the highest number of instances there, 10,000 over those couple of weeks. We monitor, by the way, over 100 cities across the United States at Media Monitor. So this is a good sample of the upper and medium market. Top 40 sports, as we mentioned before, AC, classic rock, and classic hits and hot AC are the adult formats where you target an audience which is more mature. And we see some Latin in the original Mexican, Spanish contemporary. So obviously those are the ones that are tracked, and these are Spanish speaking ads for the most part. Some of them are English speaking, but some of them are Spanish speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go to the categories?
Let's hold off on categories because we're going to go into those questions next, and we'll let the agency leaders talk about what the expansion over the last couple of years has meant as far as opportunities to their folks. Angie, maybe we start with you.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting is we've seen these really high-profile mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of these big networks are continuing to diversify their offerings. So we're finding really good opportunities within a specific network to be able to advertise cross-channel, across terrestrial, online radio, streaming, podcasts, video podcasts. It's really interesting to see these companies offer, a lot within what they already currently have, and with that offering a lot of first-party data, which is also really interesting to see. But yeah, I'd say like the diversification of those assets has created some really good opportunities within a network to, by various channels and mediums, and be able to really negotiate some added value within that on digital to kind of help bring overall CPMs down. So some of those opportunities have been really advantageous just due to diversification of these networks.
Hey, Tom, I wanted to just chime in real quick and just mention one of the things that Philippe said there and give it as an example of how the world has evolved, right? So most DR advertisers know that news talk has been the bread and butter of the audio world, okay? It has more inventory available. It has a more engaged listener. There's a lot of benefits to it, okay? But it also had, and let's just call it what it is, in the AM/FM world, news talk was often conservative talk. And that really was, if you wanted to go after a particular audience, you had to take what that meant, and that meant you were going to be primarily running on conservative talk radio shows, okay? I'm taking out of the equation sports talk and some of the things like that. I'm just talking now, as the audio world has evolved, there's a lot more variety to that. So especially in podcasts, you're seeing that the progressive voice that could never really get itself established in the AM FM world, now has a huge share of the audience in spoken word podcast. So it gives the audience a lot more variety. It's not that those people weren't there, it's just that the nature of the channel forced you to have limited choices. Now that there are more channels, you have more choices. And so I think that that's a perfect kind of microcosm of how the audio world has evolved to offer more options and more opportunity. And it really does give somebody who says, I don't want my particular brand necessarily pigeonholed to one particular type of political attitude or whatever, not to have to be forced to do that. So I think that that's just a perfect opportunity to say, you know, where has audio grown? And it gives you, I mean, again, if you want to continue to target the conservative audience, now you can. You just don't only have to use AM FM network radio as well. You have lots of, you know, the Ben Shapiro's of the world in their podcasts. You have lots of other options for that audience as well, but not just that audience, a wider variety of audiences as well.
Right. Absolutely, great point, Buck. Jeff, where are you guys finding the opportunities in the growing space?
You know, I think I need to echo both Angie and Buck on that the options are really it's great to be able to say they're really limitless at this point. Podcasting, the genres that are available is been exceptional for broadening the reach that our clients can have. But I don't want to discount what network radio has done and how they've been able to offer inventory that we hadn't seen in the past, and there's been a lot of consolidation with their stations, so the way that they offer terrestrial offerings is a lot more there's opportunity to get in front of stations and outlets that we didn't previously have access to or couldn't have done without more resources at the agency level to reach the thousands of stations that are available to marketers. So it's really a broad reach across the various channels that our clients have leveraged. Great.
Let's laser down a little bit on formats here. Philippe got us started on that. You know, with some of the hot formats in terrestrial. Angie, I know you brought us a slide here for podcast formats. Why don't we have you run us through that real quick? Let me pull it up.
Yeah, I think we'll see some interesting similarities with radio as well. But sports, comedy, and news typically tend to be the top performing formats. We saw that in Q2 and Q3 especially, you know, given the seasonality of sports, we saw a huge increase of brands advertising in those categories. Comedy continues to be popular across quarter to quarter, as well as news and society and culture. So I'd say, yeah, the similarities are pretty obvious with the different formats and genres across channels here.
Makes sense. I think, you know, Jeff, Buck, is there, you know, obviously the format success is often going to break down what the product category makes the most sense. But is there any specific format, say in the last 6 months, that you're seeing that's been really great for your clients?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick and just mention, because I think it's kind of an interesting case study, right? Is like, again, for a large percentage of people who are coming into DR, when they think of DR audio, whether it's traditional radio or otherwise, it's spoken word. Okay, so they're thinking about how do I either leverage a host or have something with an engaged audience that's really listening to what's going on in terms of the content, instead of it being music where the advertisement is an interruption from what I'm really tuning in to listen to, and more likely to probably try and switch away to get more music, right? All right, so spoken word tends to have more stickiness as far as that audience staying with it. The interesting for us is that, you know, I'm a old school, as the gray hair shows, DR guy, right? So like I subscribe entirely. In fact, I probably can get it tattooed on my body here, is that at the right price, all media works. So it really just boils down to what's the cost, and if it's the right cost, it's going to work for us. We have a campaign that's running right now on Sirius. It's actually probably the #1 campaign on Sirius. It's the Navage nasal care, and we aren't even buying News Talk because News Talk is overpriced, and we're getting it to work phenomenally well on formats that most people would say to you don't work for DR, like comedy and all these other kind of, what would be considered kind of marginal channels. At least as far as Sirius is concerned, they're like, oh, those aren't our big audiences. Our big audiences are Fox News and all those other places. But at the right price, all media works. So if you can get those opportunities at a low enough CPM, guess what? That audience is still a viable audience. It's just a matter of where's the premium right now. And that kind of, not to jump ahead, but that also is the dangerous deep waters of the podcast world, which is when people say, I want to get into podcasting. Well, be careful, because there may be dragons there. There's some really high costs. And if the economics don't make sense, it's kind of up to the guys, I'm sure Jeff would agree. It's kind of up to us to be able to talk people out of making really bad decisions. Because of course, what's going to happen is if it doesn't go well, they're going to be like, well, what'd you let me do that for? You should have told me no. And so it's part of our job is to say no. That's not where we should go, or that's not at least where we should go first, and then really be able to figure out. And again, I kind of subscribe to this crawl, walk, run mentality of let's prove it out, and then we can scale it accordingly once we've proven it out in kind of a safe, risk-averse environment.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. Anything surprising like that? Buck saying that they're having success on comedy as an outlet on Sirius. Anything surprising like that to you over the last 6 months, or something specific that's really working as a format?
Well, I guess I'd lean over to the podcast side, and where we're seeing a lot of success, and people would be oftentimes surprised. The wrestling podcasts stand out as something that is surprising, and they wouldn't expect their product to work there. But I know that wrestling and true crime are two formats that Angie didn't mention, but we have found tremendous success and huge audiences in both of those genres.
Interesting. Anything surprising on your end, Angie, going back to you to kind of round it out?
Yeah, I was about to say, Jeff, you beat me to it. True crime has definitely been a head scratcher for, many advertisers thinking that, their audiences aren't there because it's true crime and can, typically skew more female, but it's impressive on how well that format has worked for a lot of our clients. So I think it's also really interesting too, when you're looking at formats, not to just assume, business owners don't listen to comedy or business owners don't listen to true crime. I think we're missing the mark when we're just assuming that they're not. So I think those are some of the things that are just really interesting to take a look at and, learn from.
That's great. Yeah, I think we all could probably chime in with our own personal views on podcasts that we all listen to, but and what works there and what catches our ear. There's no doubt that it's just such a growing segment. Let's shift over back to Philippe and talk about products. Get us started talking about product categories and verticals that are working in each of the various outlets. Philippe, I'm gonna bring up your slide here, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so this is the top 5 categories that we've seen across cable, radio, and broadcast TV. Essentially, you got yellow cable, in blue radio, and in green TV. You have almost always the same order of importance. Home, commercial, improvement, product and services. What's behind those kinds of labels? So I think maybe we could try to play an audio one spot just to have a quick idea of what's the #1 category that we found over the past couple of weeks.
Perfect. You want me to run that now?
Yeah, you can. It's a minute and a half, so the ad is somewhere in there.
Just know that everybody that your screen is going to go black, but you should be able to hear the ad, and I'm going to play it right now.
They've just reopened 1 and 9 right by Route 3 in North Bergen. Vehicle fire finally cleared, but we still have 2 lanes closed on Route 3 heading west coming in to Route 17. I'm Steve Michaels, Chalk Radio 77 WABC.
Did your home suffer water damage from Hurricane Ida? You're likely still struggling with dampness, musty odors, and mold concerns. Solve that with Easy Breathe basement ventilation, an important part of your cleanup process, protecting your home from further decay. Easy Breathe provides air exchanges for a safe and healthy home, sending that damp, dirty air to the outside and replacing it with cleaner, drier air. Better than a dehumidifier, Easy Breathe exhausts stagnant basement air using ventilation to remove odors, allergens, chemicals, dust mites, viruses, pet dander, and more. Plus, with no buckets to empty or filters to change, Easy Breathe is efficient and affordable. Get 20% off in October by saying, "I heard it on the radio." Let Easy Breathe fix your indoor air for good and save 20%. Don't wait. Call the experts at 866-82-BREATHE. That's 866-82-BREATHE. 866-82-BREATHE. Or visit easybreathe.com today.
The following is a paid political announcement paid for by Curtis Sliwa for mayor.
This is Curtis Sliwa.
All right. We're back.
All right.
Next slide.
Yeah, next slide. Other key categories that we've seen that are significant: household appliances, cosmetics, skincare, health equipment, sporting goods. Of course, you know, these are just this particular 2 weeks again. So some of the product is seasonal, some is not. Eye care, probably allergies, maybe, I don't know.
Can't help but think that it's a little funny that the audio category is working best for people who have eye problems.
Can you believe that? We don't see hearing head there, right?
That's right.
All right. What else we got in there? We good with those categories?
Yep.
And for
right.
podcasting, since we're talking about podcasting, if you want to just add the categories that we see in podcasting. So podcast streaming and distribution. This is the number one. 2,200 instances over the sample. Our sample is about 5,000 podcasts. All episodes of 5,000 podcasts. So it's about 30,000 episodes that we run through artificial intelligence. And some of the spots are pre-recorded, some are baked in, host read, and what we know by experience, of course, and you guys probably know that also, that podcast is the number one category to advertise on podcasts because that's what works best. And you're talking to listeners of podcasts, and you tell them, why don't you try this podcast? So that's why that number one category is up there. Wireless internet services, business and consumer services, insurance provider. Geico is already one of the strong audio advertiser there. So they're also segueing into podcast. Banks, public services, consumer electronic, discount department store, and those are the categories that we see. And we have a couple of details on the advertiser. If you can switch to the.
Actually, I'm going to go go over to Angie for her thoughts on the podcast verticals and then the podcast categories.
Yeah, these are going to be looking at year to date, more so than month over month. We're seeing these in Magellan, which also kind of records and transcribes podcast activity in the space. We definitely saw and still see that business and software continues to kind of lead the way as far as how many advertisers and spend in the space. Financial services, direct-to-consumer products, consumer packaged goods, food, consumer services and software, mental health, insurance, apps, automotive, nutritional supplements, health services, phone, internet, cable, betting, and television and film. I think it's really interesting to see financial services, just given the audience. There's a Nielsen study that says over 74% of podcast listeners have some sort of financial investment. So it really does make sense to know that audience is really already educated and engaged. I thought that was interesting as well.
Very true. Very true. Philippe, I think we go back to you here with podcast advertisers that you guys have measured in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, so on that sample, on that particular sample, sometimes good to put names on the ad. So there's on the top of that list is Appliance World. So everybody was like, "What the heck, Appliance World? This is a shop which is in Huntington Beach, California. So it's a West Coast thing. Those guys are going big time on podcasts for some reason, and they want to sell GE appliances and dishwasher, ovens, air fryers, and so forth. And they took a particular one, which was on the AP Associated Press headline news podcast, which is once every hour. They release the latest news. So that skews the number of occurrences that we see. But once you pass that, you see the usual. I mean, as I said, Geico is a big name in audio, and they didn't want to miss a beat. They are Facebook, BetterHelp, Walmart, Amazon Recruitment. You know that that hiring is a critical thing these days, and you certainly have a good target for millennials that do, and Gen Z and Gen Y that do listen to podcasts. FanDuel, DraftKings, we've seen in general in the audio category a gigantic drench of the airwaves with the sport betting category. You know, it's legal in 22 states now. It's coming in a state near you, if not your state, little by little. I think New York said, okay, they're going to make it official in a couple of months, and it's only a matter of time. So this money is not going anywhere. It will stay there, and it will probably even increase on a national scale as time goes on.
Great. Perfect. Jeff, Buck, anything to add on product categories that are having success that you guys are seeing?
I think obviously these guys have covered it quite thoroughly. We've seen a lot in the fitness space, which or at-home fitness, I should say specifically. I don't think that's any surprise to all of us that have been at home for a long time. You know, I echo the financial products and services, seeing and expecting an expansion there in now and in the year to come at least, and think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I've found it very interesting just to see the price points of products specifically to podcasts that advertisers can be successful with. We have client that sells e-bikes, and so you know you got an AOV over $2,000. So I encourage any advertiser, anybody listening, not to be deterred by a high price point, and that there is a lot of opportunity in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd just add that, you know, again, kind of goes back to chicken egg, right? It's like, are there a wider variety of advertisers because there's a wider variety of channels for them to advertise in? Maybe, but the fact of the matter is both are true, and whether one begets the other, the reality is that podcasting and streaming have ushered in an entirely new categories of advertisers that were ignoring traditional radio. They were not utilizing it, and now they're finding in podcasting a place for them. So that's why I come back to kind of that central idea of not whether we should be doing audio, but which form of audio should we be doing? Because there's going to be one that's going to fit almost any category of product out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Flipping away from podcasts just for a moment, you know, obviously you mentioned Sirius earlier, Buck. Digital only audio businesses like Spotify, Apple Music, iHeart, Sirius, they're striving for their own level of differentiation, fighting for their share of the pie. What creative opportunities are out there for D2C advertisers on those types of outlets, and how do they compare to the terrestrial or the podcast?
So it's interesting, right? Because it's exciting that there are all of these new channels that are available. The challenge that we have, and I won't throw any particular advertiser or channel under the bus. I think I could probably throw them all under the bus, honestly, is that they have, you know, again, if you're somebody who has utilized traditional radio in the past, you're going to have a splash of cold water when it comes time to try and work with the Spotify's of the world or the Pandoras or whomever's, because not only are the costs going to be considerably higher than what you might be used to, the cost of admission just to get to the table and play, the ante, if you will, is considered. This is not the neighborhood poker game. This is Vegas, and they're expecting people to come to the table with pretty significant budgets if you want to really be able to get placement. So is that always going to be the case? I don't think so. It's the nature of the beast that it's invariably going to start to come down once they start to see that they can't get everybody to come to the table with a $50,000 a month minimum. But it's where it is now. And hey, listen, beauty of capitalism. If they can get it, they're going to get it. And right now they can get it because there's a lot of demand for it. So that's why, again, I come back to the client and I'm like, just because you want to be on there doesn't mean that that's the right place for you to be right now. Maybe in the future, but right now, if the economics of it don't make sense, don't force your hand and then lose your shirt because you went in to, a barrage of bullets you should have seen coming. So that's where, for us, it's exciting, especially for products that are trying to gear towards that 18 to 35-year-old demo. We can really be able to utilize digital a lot more effectively than we could traditional terrestrial radio. And I'm talking music formats and other formats, not just traditional news talk. So there's a lot of great opportunities there, but you gotta go with your eyes wide open as far as the costs are concerned.
Jeff, Angie, anything to add there?
Sure. I guess I can echo Buck there in terms of the costs that are associated with the platforms and the minimums that are required. You definitely have to be prepared to spend if that's a channel that you want to learn about, and it's something that can offer a lot of valuable insights. And when the budget's there, certainly really dial in on some very specific demographics and learn a lot about creative messaging out of the gate. We've done that and used that platform when the budget's allowed so that we can use those insights for scaling in other channels. But there's limitations when it comes to cost, but there's also some other advantages. One of the things that we have tested with a couple of clients and always ask for when we're doing terrestrial radio is to fall first in a stop set, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when your ad is going to be heard first. But to a listener on any of these digital platforms, you can have first impression guarantee. So the first ad that is served is your ad. They're like anything, a premium that's associated with that, but really getting out in front of an audience before they might be distracted or moving to the next task.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Angie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, there's a tremendous growth in programmatic. I personally don't think programmatic's where it needs to be quite yet, but we are seeing a lot of managed programmatic, which is kind of a nice blend between both worlds, still having control over that media and making those optimizations in real time. But I do agree with both Jeff and Buck. The minimum barrier to entry is pretty significant, especially for some brands that have smaller budgets to test. Not saying that those couldn't be ideal tests. I think it's just really leaning on historical knowledge on what's worked best for other brands, understanding what kind of advertisers are in those spaces to see how well the audience would be receptive to your client's brand. I think it's gaining an understanding of basically the audiences you're trying to reach and finding those opportunities within those different opportunities.
Right. We're going to do the last couple of questions here in the podcast zone. I'm going to combine a couple into one question here and let Philippe tackle it first, just for time. Past 8 years, podcast listenership has quadrupled in the United States. There'll be more than 117 million U.S. podcast listeners this year. And they're solidly middle class to affluent, generally speaking. They also don't mind advertising. One survey showed that 78% of them don't mind advertising during a podcast, and in fact are like it. So let me ask this. First, can you describe how big the shift has been toward podcast in the last, say, 18 months to 2 years? And two, what do you think makes podcast listeners such a valuable target for D2C advertisers?
I can take a first step at that question.
Philippe, you're on mute again.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so briefly, Angie, feel free to jump in at any time, but for sure, podcast is right now it's a sea of things. I mean, there's over 1 million podcasts. You know that 40% of the podcasts have only one episode. So it's really a bit of everything there, and so you're trying when you do podcast. We're still trying to find a solution for brand safety. What exactly are those standards that we would like to see in the podcast? What about the long tail? I mean, nobody wants to touch the long tail of podcasts, those small onesies and twosies with a 10-foot pole, because we don't know what's in there, and it's a lot. So there's a lot to be achieved there. But what has been achieved in the past 18 months is nothing short of mind-boggling. It spread like a wildfire. And what makes the podcast successful is, of course, the engagement of two. One of the hosts, when you have a host thread, I mean, you have a guy or a lady that's involved with whatever he or she's talking about when it's host thread. Of course, for programmatic, it's different, as Angie points out. Programmatic's programmatic, so you get something which is pretty cookie cutter. But most importantly, the listener is engaged. Podcast survey after survey proves that the memorization of the ad by a podcast listener is superior to the one that a radio listener has. And when you listen to a podcast, earbuds on, and you go walk your dog, you go work out, you go do something, and you just listen to that thing one-on-one. It's really what makes a difference.
Angie.
Yeah, I would say, definitely the disruptions caused by the pandemic really made brands pivot, and audio can typically be, faster and less expensive to produce. And I think we did see a lot of, screen fatigue, to be quite honest, and, shifting, media consumption. So I think those are some of the things that attributed the rapid growth. I think one of the biggest things too is the development of more attribution tools in the space. I think a lot of advertisers have been a little shy to explore the medium because data and attribution tools have been limited, but we're definitely seeing, much more sophisticated manners to attribute leads and conversions. I think also too, there's definitely growing popularity within mainstream media. We see a lot of celebrities involved in this space. We see a lot of TV shows and movies inspired by podcasts. I think a lot of those things have really accelerated the growth in the last 18 months. And I think what does make podcast listeners so valuable, such an ideal audience for marketers is, they're very loyal. So, most podcast listeners, I think it's 31% of podcast listeners tune into 6 podcasts a week. That's a significant number. Philippe was talking about being able to, have a higher ad recall within an episode. And that's true because you typically have a higher share of voice. There's less ads within an episode. There are different placements within the episode, pre-rolls, mid-rolls, which are most ideal. Produce spots versus host reads. I think we'll get into a little bit more on host reads later down the line. But yeah, I just think it's a really desirable, audience because, high household income, high education, and just the engagement that they go about when they're listening to a show.
Yeah, I think you make a couple of good points. I'm going to push into our next question and go to Jeff and Buck on this one about host reads, host endorsements. The points you made about how many celebrities are involved, well-known people involved in podcast, the commitment of the listener, all that. Guys, Jeff, Buck, chime in here. Obviously, host read ads, host endorsements have been a gold standard on terrestrial radio forever, but it's like they're on steroids in podcast. It feels like. Can you talk about why and how effective those can be?
So I'm. How much time do we have? Because I could talk about this for about the next 3 hours. So
Yeah, if we can keep it tight, a couple minutes, that'd be great.
I keep it tight, and I will just say that I'm going to be kind of the guy who's going to look behind the curtain here and say, hey, it's not a wizard, it's just a guy. So the reality with podcasts, it's a bright, shiny, exciting world for especially the audio to be able to grow into. They're getting premium rates for it and all this kind of stuff. There's a dark underbelly to this, and not to sound too dramatic, but the reality is they're going to kill the golden goose if they try and wring too much more commercial inventory out of these spots. One of these shows, one of the reasons that it works is that there isn't much commercial load on most of these, and the more that they keep trying to turn it into radio, in like it will. And most of the podcast companies now are owned, sorry, Philippe, by radio companies. So they're not managing them the way that they used to. They're now managing them like their little radio programs. And that's a problem, because that's going to create issues. The other part, and this is one of the things that Andy just talked about, it used to be that you had these really engaging podcasters who nobody had ever heard about, but knew of them through their podcast. Now you've got the dog being wagged by the tail, because now these companies are going out and saying, let's go get somebody that everybody's heard of and get them to do a podcast. Well, just because, Joe Blow is well known for being a musician or whatever, doesn't mean he's going to be a really good podcaster. But because Joe Blow is going to get paid $5 million by the company that owns the podcast to do it, now they got to go out and sell that inventory at a $35 CPM, or else it doesn't work. So it isn't growing organically. They're meddling with the beauty of it, and that's creating challenges for advertisers who are coming in saying, well, how do I know there's even going to be an audience for this guy? Like, how do I even know he's good at doing podcasts, or everybody's going to come back? Anyway, long story short, podcasts are exciting, but you need to go into them with your eyes wide open. We are DR advertisers. I assume that the vast majority of the people that are on here are interested in making whatever investment they make in their advertising a profit center. It is really easy to not do that in podcasting, and but when you do get that magic mix, and what I mean by that, and you're exactly right, Tom, the right host with the right product with the right audience at the right price, the magic happens. Now, one thing that I do want to just add, and I'm sorry for monopolizing, Jeff, I promise I'll shut up after this. One of the things that made host endorsements so attractive to advertisers in the past is that it carried with it categorical exclusivity. Hey, if I'm going to put my bona fides behind this product, I'm not going to talk about another product in the same category. All right. So if Sean Hannity was talking about Tempur-Pedic, he wasn't going to be talking about Select Comfort. That's true in a very, very clearly defined sense on podcasts. I won't talk about it in the same podcast, but that doesn't mean that in the next podcast, if you're not buying space in there, I'm not going to go and put my endorsement behind that. So the nature of the beast is a little different than what you may have seen in terrestrial radio, where an advertiser might say, hey, I'm leveraging my credibility with my audience. And heck, you used to be able to have what I used to call a burnt ground, where like they wouldn't talk about another product in the same category for like 13 weeks to make sure that it didn't like sully their reputation as a spokesperson. That's not true in podcasts. If the check clears, they're talking about it. So from that perspective, just know what you're getting into, that it doesn't exactly equate to the same thing that you had in network radio.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the last question.
I think that I can share the sentiments that Buck and Angie have shared as it relates to the host endorsements, and I agree with all of that. I'm not going to tie up more time on that.
All right, great. Thank you. Last question, and I'm going to go to Angie on this one first, because I know you got some stats here to share with us. Podcast advertising has set the top 1.6 billion total last year. A lot of people think that means the market is shifting away from direct-to-consumer advertisers into brands. Direct-to-consumer advertisers generally built the podcast advertising space, it feels like. But there's still plenty of bandwidth, pardon the pun, for performance marketers to succeed in this space. Why is that, do you think, Angie? And I'll bring up your slide.
Yeah, and actually too, just going back to some of the top industries and verticals, you'll see that, DTC is still at the top, number 3 strongest, advertisers or categories in the space. I think, although, 2021 has hit an all-time high as far as listenership goes, I think there's still so much more room. I mean, if we look at it, 41% of the US population listens to a podcast monthly. That's only 41%. So if we think of the amount of growth that's still available in that space, it's still very tremendous. We also see that, according to Nielsen, 41% of podcast listeners plan to increase their time spent with podcasts over the 6 months. So we're only going to see not only more audiences, but more time spent listening to those shows. And then last but not least, there's over 1,700 advertisers that were reported in Q3 only. So I think there definitely still is bandwidth for performance marketers out there to really succeed in this space. I just think understanding, that we still haven't exploded in growth is really important to know. In the next 2 years, podcasting is going to grow as much as it has in the past decade. So we're also seeing, an influx of a lot of, more casual listeners too, where listeners are listening to less frequently, but are younger, and those audiences are growing tremendously as well. I think there's still plenty of space for everyone to play.
Great. Jeff, final thoughts on room for growth in podcast?
I wholeheartedly agree with Angie that there's a tremendous amount of growth for direct-to-consumer advertising, and there are really very few limitations, in my opinion, at this point to I guess repeat what Buck said a moment ago about finding the right podcast at the right price is really the key. And what we're employed to do is really be aware of what the options are for advertisers so that we can put their best foot forward and really build on that success around other podcasts that are comparable and have similar audiences, but not being afraid to test into things that might, as we spoke about true crime earlier, that might go a little bit beyond what somebody feels is going to reach their customer and open up doors that they didn't know had valuable listeners.
Yeah. Philippe, final thoughts from you?
I think there's going to be, first of all, I think the market will regulate itself, Buck. I mean, the price will go down as you get, cold feet on those prices. Just hang up the phone and I'll call you back, I'm sure. But there's going to be, I think the industry is going to go into more identification of the smaller podcasts to be able to access that long tail. So you won't have everybody trying to get the big stars and those big millions of downloads. And so that will open up to people who want to sell their inventory, and they have a podcast which is they're ultra specialized, and it's a little smaller audience, but it works for direct marketing. And it'll fluctuate. If you go, we're studying the way it's going in Europe, for example, and in Europe, just as an example, it's just starting. They're getting there. They have about 2 years behind the U.S. and CPMs are like $8 over there. Now you're lucky if you get $8 with a podcast. So it's still a hobby for most of the people. So it will go up and down. It will. There's plenty of room to grow for DR, and everybody will find the right audio for them.
Right. Buck.
Well, listen, we're not talking about something that has FCC type of bandwidth regulations associated with it. So the pie just keeps growing exponentially because everybody with a microphone can be a podcaster. I mean, honestly, the guy who probably served you dinner last night has a podcast. If you went out to dinner. So it's growing. The question becomes one of concentration of audience, right? And where is there enough people listening to that to be able to make it viable for you from a direct marketer's perspective? And I'm totally in agreement with Philippe that the very nature of the competition and the fact that it's growing that way is going to create more and more opportunities. It's up to the direct marketing community to really be able to flex its muscles and be able to say, hey, listen, our money's just as green as the brand advertisers, and we are there for you in that beginning period when you're just trying to figure out which way is up. Don't turn your back on us when now all of a sudden some of the more brand-centric type folks start throwing big money at you and forget where you came from. And that's really where I think a lot of podcasts are finding themselves these days.
Yeah, makes sense. If you guys got a couple extra minutes, we'll address a couple questions from the audience.
Sure.
All right, great. Got a really good one to start with, and whoever wants to jump in. What's the most updated information on performance attribution in audio? We have clients still wanting to rely on offer codes alone, and that just isn't working well anymore in audio. Are there attribution methods that are available now or coming soon for direct sales to an e-commerce site?
Who wants to take that first?
Angie?
Angie?
I can take that specifically when it comes to podcasting. I spoke a little bit about attribution tools that are available these days. There's companies like Podsights and Chartable, and LeadsRx is also in the space as well, where they're able to implement a pixel to the audio ad and a pixel to the brand's website. And I think it's definitely advancing in the space. It's becoming a little bit more like digital, but not quite as robust quite yet, just given the nature of audio. But those are definitely some of the tools that we're implementing and recommending in the podcast space, just to be able to get any sort of not only attribution data, but also, making sure that our shows are delivering the impressions and downloads we contracted. So those are some of the attribution tools that are available, at least in the podcast site.
Yeah, I would definitely say that comparative to what you were dealing with, again, years ago in the broadcast world, the amount of data and attribution that you can have based on the digital delivery mechanism of both podcasts and streaming is head and shoulders above what we've had in the past. And yes, we're well beyond just the offer codes and unique 800 numbers and things of that nature. You still will find some advertisers that want to utilize those kind of methodologies, but the reality is that through pixels and different type of tracking, you can be able to use not just the agency, but third-party tracking capabilities to really be able to have very granular insight into what exactly happened once that message went out into the world.
On traditional audio, to just add that on not on podcast but on traditional audio, there are good correlation tool. Mediameters does the attribution based on exposure to ads, so you can correlate visit to the website as Angie's saying. It's a Google Analytics which gives you the ability to track down and correlate the visit to your website based on the number of occurrences that you have. It's not as quite total attribution where you can track down one individual having been exposed to that one ad and then going to that one website. But as a correlation tool, there's some pretty good stuff that's out there.
A lot of layers are needed to be implemented to gain as much visibility as possible, and obviously pixels on podcasts and streaming is key. Anytime you can get a client to have, how did you hear about a survey at checkout? That's a layer. If you're only depending on directly attributable leads, that will add another component to the multiplier you're going to add in at on the back end.
Yeah. Let's wedge one more in from the audience here before we call it. And this is, I think we might get an array of answers. We might get a good range here. What is a cost per spot range for podcasts, and what unit lengths do they accept?
I could take a stab at that if you don't mind. It's going to depend too. So we talked about host reads, and we also talked about produced ads, and those ads are going to be very differently priced. Also placement within podcasts, we typically see pre-rolls, which start just before the content or at the beginning of the content. We see mid-rolls, which are desirable because listeners are already engaged with the show and they're less likely to skip an ad. And then post-rolls, which are typically spots we don't recommend buying, but it doesn't hurt if they can be included as added value. It also depends on, you know, the how the show is set up. Not all shows allow for pre-rolls, mid-rolls, and post-rolls. I would say that the typical range we see, depending on the placement, if it's a host read, it's definitely going to get that premium. We're seeing anywhere between, you know, 25 to 45 to 55 plus CPMs, depending on the show. Again, we talked about just because it's a popular show doesn't mean it's necessarily the best place for you to advertise. But yeah, so there's a range. And then produced ads typically, you know, you can see anywhere between $18 to $25 CPMs. Again, it depends on the campaign length. Depends if you're, you know, adding any targeting. There's a variety of factors in there, but definitely podcast ads are going to have more of a premium attached to them.
Mm.
Yeah, so you have your traditional 60s, and it all depends. If it's a produced 60, then it's 60. If it's a baked in 60, it may be more than that. You may have the host go on and on. We have many hosts who do live content who talk for several minutes, and those are wonderful. Of course, the handlers are trying to get them to not do that because they're not getting paid more for doing that, but we love it when they do. So you have 30s and 60s and as your traditional vehicles. Are there others? Yes, but from a DR perspective, you don't really care about those. Are there longer? Yeah, again, the smaller the show, the more they may be willing to wheel and deal and not be as married to a particular duration of spot. But that's to be negotiated. The trade-off of getting a 2-minute spot is that they may have a very small audience. So and again, talking about spot rates, I hate to sound like an agency guy, but I'm an agency guy. I don't really pay attention to them because whether it's $8 or $8,000, it doesn't matter to me what the spot rate is. It matters what am I getting as far as the value associated with that. So I look at it more in terms of the cost per 1,000 impressions that are going along with that. And I would just tell you this, you know, traditional network radio, for people who weren't doing it before, should take a hard look at it now because there's real value there. And that's a direct reflection of competition. They don't have the stranglehold that they had in the past because people can take their dollars across the street, or in the case of some of these conglomerates, across the hallway to the podcast team or the digital streaming team or whatever. But that's where I see more value buying right now, is that network radio has some really low CPMs. I'm talking $2-3. So it's hard not to make DR work when you can buy it at low rates like that.
Right. Jeff.
You know, from a rate standpoint, I agree with everything Buck and Angie shared. We're seeing very similar rates and CPMs. Not getting into the dollar value because obviously that depends on the size of the audience. And the spot length is, you know, on the terrestrial side, almost predominantly 60s, where we see the best value for that ad, unless of course it's streaming and everything is 30s there. Right. And then on the podcast, as Buck just said, if it's baked in, it's oftentimes 60, but more often than not, 90 plus.
Gotcha. Great. Well, hey, thank you to all four of you, Angie, Buck, Philippe, Jeff. I'm just going in the order I see you on my screen. We really appreciate everything and the time you took today to share your thoughts with people on this great and growing segment. This video, for those of you who are watching and want to make sure that a colleague of yours sees it, this video should be on our website Friday or no later than Monday. So keep an eye out on our social media for that announcement. Again, thank you to the PDMI Workshop Council for bringing us the event today. If you're a PDMI member and would like to get involved in the Workshop Council or any of our councils, you can reach out directly to me or any of your PDMI team members to get involved. Your next opportunity to attend a PDMI event live online is a special webinar just added to our fall seminar series calendar, thanks to the Government Affairs Council. It's titled the FTC's Q4 Crackdown and features a one-on-one conversation between Baker Hostetler partner and longtime PDMI Government Affairs Council member Linda Goldstein and the former acting director of the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, and now a Baker Hostetler partner himself, Daniel Kaufman. This special event is slated for 2 weeks from today, December 1st at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific. Your opportunity to RSVP will land in your email inbox tomorrow morning. It'll also be available on our website tomorrow morning. So thank you again for joining us today on the Fall Seminar Series. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your work week. Stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.